You're listening to the Place Northwest COP26 podcast series,
a dedicated series that explores all things net zero carbon and sustainability within the built environment.
Alongside some of the biggest names in property, we'll be delving into topics such as
why the market is pushing net zero carbon faster than legislation.
Is renovation and retrofitting better for the planet than new construction?
How can we balance sustainability concerns with profit margins?
And much, much more.
Don't miss any future episodes. Subscribe at placenorthwest.co.uk/subscribe or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Place Northwest COP26 podcast series. I'm your host, Dan Whelan. Today's episode is sponsored by Bruntwood. Bruntwood has been creating thriving cities for more than 40 years and is deeply connected with the communities it operates in, creating vibrant places and unlocking economic potential. In 2018, Bruntwood became the UK's first commercial property company to join the Net Zero Carbon Building Commitment. Today, we are asking one simple question. How do you build a new build net zero office? Being net zero in operation is one thing, but tackling the issue of embodied carbon is another, altogether tougher challenge. Today, I am joined by Aisling McNulty, Development Director at Bruntwood Works, and Sophie West, Policy and Strategic Project Manager at Bruntwood. They will tell us what it is like to create a net zero new build and tell us what issues need to be considered, if it can be done at scale, and what are the cost implications compared to a less green development. Aisling and Sophie, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Hi.
Excellent. So let's get started. I wonder if you can set the scene for us. I know you can't tell us everything about this project that you're working on, but what can you tell us about it and what are the drivers behind it? Aisling, we'll start with you.
It's a project that's really close to my heart and that we've been working on for about 18 months, 2 years now at this stage. And as a business, we took a really important step in our sustainability commitments and we became the first commercial property business to commit to be net zero carbon in line with the UK GPC framework. And as a result of that, we saw an opportunity to look to develop an exemplar net zero carbon building for the office market. It's, as you said, it's something we can't talk about in too much detail because it is a net zero concept building at the moment, but we are looking effectively to develop an exemplar operational and embodied carbon new development in the Northwest.
Okay, excellent. You mentioned the UK Green Building Council there. Their target is for all buildings to be net zero embodied carbon by 2050.
Yes.
And this ties in with that. What stage of the process in terms of the progress of the project are we at currently? Should we be expecting a planning application anytime soon? Where are we?
We're still in design work stages, but we are not too far off from submitting a planning application. So we're hopeful we can do that in the coming months.
Exciting. Sophie, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the drivers behind this. So we know about the UK Green Building Council target, but there's more to it than just meeting that target, isn't there, for Bruntwood?
Yeah, absolutely. We are all living within a climate emergency, and we know that not only is the world getting warmer, it's getting wetter, it's getting windier, we're living through sort of weather events that are more catastrophic, but are happening more frequently. So the commitment and the ways that we develop buildings are in line with what is going on outside of those buildings as well. And buildings exist to protect us from the outside. And so the way that we need to develop those buildings are to protect us from what is happening outside. And the commitment, like I say, is one element of that. And so the way that we actually build our concept building has to change, but also the way that we manage that building as well needs to change. And that's how we'll ensure that the operational side of things is aligned with the commitment. But when we talk about sort of the climate emergency and the changes outside, people are changing as well. The way that we talk about climate is different, and the way that we talk about the world is as well. And we need to match that in terms of what we offer customers and potential customers around us and our partners as well. So our spaces have to be places that accommodate the needs of those customers, the needs of those partners, as well as the needs of the wider community around us. And will not offer any of that if we continue to sort of develop in the same way or redevelop in the same way as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sophie. So let's get into it. How do we do it? Let's talk materials first. Aisling, can you tell us a little bit about that in terms of this project?
There's a few different ways that you can look at changing the materials that you build your building with. A lot of it will be due to site-specific constraints. So your location, the size, the scale of the particular building that you want to build, and I think the type of building as well. So we're fortunate that our site constraints are such that we are able to look at a timber frame solution rather than looking at a steel or a concrete frame solution. So our exemplar building will be tackling embodied carbon by using materials which are low carbon and which actually have a sequestration benefit as well.
Okay, and what are the options for, let's say, a timber frame is not viable in another situation for another developer? What other options are available to them if they want to build a net zero embodied carbon building?
So working towards the UK GBC commitments, the initial kind of step in the embodied carbon journey is reducing embodied carbon by 40% by 2030. And in terms of the carbon intensity targets, they range from UKBGC targets of 600 kilograms or less as a best case, and a maximum of 800 kilograms of carbon per meter squared. So I think if you're looking to do a more traditional approach to building, you should be looking at materials which are produced in a way to help reduce the amount of carbon within them, so they might have a higher recycled element to them, or actually trying to look to use less of the materials in the first place. So can you build smarter? Can you design in such a way that actually you use less steel or use less concrete, or you are looking at products which have a higher recycled content?
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And how big, this exemplar building, how big are we talking in square feet? So I want to get an idea of the cost implication of using timber over concrete or steel, for example. So how big is this building?
We're somewhere in the region of about 80,000 square feet net.
Okay. And how much more expensive is it to build with timber rather than concrete, or isn't it?
So the cost question is an interesting one, actually. It depends on what part of the building that you're looking at. So it's not as simple as, so in essence, the building overall is more expensive to build. That is driven by in practice, it's a new building technique for the commercial sector. It's something that has been used in residential buildings for years, so it's much better priced and understood and designed with. So we have got an overall price increase, but when you look at it, it's not significant. It's somewhere, I think, in the region of 12 to 15%.
Do you think that there is occupiers out there who would pay the rents that would allow Bruntwood to make up that premium on building a net zero carbon building?
So I think, as Sophie touched on earlier in the conversation, we really do believe that there is a marketplace for a really truly green office development. We understand that businesses and individuals, it steps up through business based on the people that they employ, and they want to attract and retain that talent war. People who are becoming much more conscientious of their own personal environmental footprint, and that is showing up on various ways through people's the way they eat, the way they shop, the way that they travel and they choose to travel, and the places that they live, and just generally within your lifestyle. And I think it would be remiss to not believe that individuals are taking that type of ethos into their jobs, into the employers and the places that they choose to work. And we know that businesses within our own family are actually saying, our customers are saying to us, how can we become greener? How can you help us work towards our sustainability credentials? So we know that there is a marketplace out there from our own experience with our customers. Added to that, I think the formal property market is becoming much more accepting of the view of brown and green assets, and the fact that assets can be viewed as being green and have an inherent additional value to that, whether it's through spaces being let quicker, through landlords achieving premiums. But as you said, premiums not often due to anything other than higher construction costs. But then also, you're going to have a point in time where assets become less competitive in the market because they haven't invested in the same way to go on that pathway to net zero carbon. And it is likely that we will see taxation in some form, one way or the other, into the development sector, whether that's through the planning process and a carbon tax placed on developments that aren't net zero carbon and more stringent offsetting regulations, or whether it's something to do with the occupier and a tax in which the occupier pays in a brown or green building being differentiated.
Okay, excellent. And that ties in with what we'll come on to later about, the incentives and how do you replicate this at scale. So that's a fantastic insight into that. In order to undertake a project like this, which is a pioneering one, you need a project team that you can trust and that you believe has the same values as you. What's that process of assembling the project team for this project been like, and how do you go about sourcing those companies?
I think it's all about finding like-minded individuals and companies that share your ethos. We were very clear from our brief at the time that we didn't want to build a building that was sustainable and that played to net zero carbon credentials and effectively greenwashed. We didn't want to go out to the market and say, we've got a building which is operationally net zero carbon and effectively offset all the energy consumed within and created and consumed within the building. What we wanted to do was set ourselves a challenge to understand how far to and how close to perfect can we get on that journey while still being commercially viable. Mm-hmm. Yeah, an exemplar building is perfect, but if you never actually get it built and you can't demonstrate it and help change the way the market thinks and behaves and delivers, then it's just a concept sat on a page.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we have to be really tuned into society as well. Customers are part of society too, and I think we're all becoming more aware of greenwashing, and it just won't sit right with people. So if those that you're working with on the same journey as you, it will come out, and people will pull you up for that. And I think we need to be very aware of that, and I think we are. And the way that we choose who we work with and the partners that we partner with is with that in mind, and we do try to make those decisions with sort of all of the best intentions. And like we say, this is an exemplar building, and we recognise the need for it, but we also recognise that there would be sort of those in the market who might have a different way of doing it to us. And so it's about choosing partners who believe in what we're doing and can support us in with our vision as well, and also help us through that journey too. And it's about working together to be able to do that and work out the things that need to be worked out. And it's a two-way conversation at the end of the day. It's not just about us saying this is what we want, provide it for us. It's more than that. It's a conversation, and it will involve workshops and going through things with people. So it's almost like a partnership approach rather than we're going to pay you to give us something.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah, well said. And I just want to go back on the point of greenwashing, because there's a lot of noise around sustainability, and it's hard, I think, for the layman to pick through it. If a developer advertises a building as being sustainable, what does that actually mean? I don't know. How can developers do a better job of making people understand what a sustainable building actually is and should be?
I think it's hard sort of for us to speak about every single developer everywhere. I think what we're trying to do is be really transparent in the processes that we're undergoing and working with those who might be able to, and hopefully in time will be able to offer us verification. And verification is something that we do advocate for, and we do think that it's a necessity in the sector. And it's something that one of our sort of sticking points that we've had has been sort of our data and reporting, and it's something that we've worked on because actually your transparency will come through in the numbers as it is financially. It will do the same for carbon as well. So I think sort of that avoidance of greenwashing and what you can do more and how you can advocate for that is by being transparent and working with those who can provide verification. And in time, I think there will be a verification for a net zero building. And that will make it a lot easier, I think, as well for the marketplace. And obviously, we can only talk about commercial buildings, but it'll be the same for residential. Eventually, people will demand to see proof of net zero in the same way that EPCs are used a lot at the moment. And there's a change in the EPCs as well. At the moment, that's kind of the one verification piece that we have in terms of how a building is performing. It's not perfect, but that's what we've got at the moment. And there's a sort of shift towards the Australian model to Neighbours UK. Again, that's another level of verification and transparency, and that's what will help sort of the layperson to understand what do you mean by you've got this green building or sustainable or net zero. It's those sort of reporting standards that are going to allow us to do that without us just making a claim, and that claim sort of can't be challenged by anyone else. That is how the challenge will happen, and we get that from sort of BREEAM already, and it's about sort of trying to associate what's going on now with things that already take place. So a lot of people in the sector will understand sort of elements of BREEAM. You don't have to know the ins and outs of it to understand that the expectations for a building. If it's a BREEAM building, you're going to walk into a space that looks great, feels great, it has the different things that you need. At some point, there will be a verification of net zero in that way. You might not be able to see all of the nuts and bolts behind what that means. You might not even be able to see the timber behind it, if it's timber, or concrete if it's used in a different way. But that verification will be there, and I think that's how we'll get to that place where anyone will understand what it means for a sustainable or net zero building.
Yeah, fantastic.
And I think on our particular concept buildings, going back to your earlier question around how do you select a team, part of the team selection was selecting experts in their fields, respective fields, based on that type of material construction and building type that we want to try and push the envelope with. One of those team members that we had to select was, our sustainability consultant, and that was a new scope of services, more evolved than we've ever done before in a building, because it included net zero carbon accounting effectively. So looking at, do we use one multidisciplinary firm to do a number of these areas for us, or do we actually think from a verification perspective, and a third party would be better? So actually somebody who doesn't have the general and the usual sustainability remit, including BREEAM, etc. And that was the route that we chose to go down. We chose to use a new company that was new to our design team profile, that brought in a net zero carbon, effectively accounting role, where they would sit in the design team, they'd work with colleagues, and we would discuss some of the material impacts. We may not have looked at the exact numbers on a design team meeting basis, but at the end of the work stage and at midpoints, they would be able to give us updates on where we sat in terms of those intensity figures for operational and embodied carbon. And we feel really comfortable that by using a third party who's different to our M&E consultant, who's different to our structural consultant, different to the architecture firm, and we can really stand up and say we're really confident in those figures. And if any customer or anybody in the market wants to challenge us on the validity of those, or the due diligence behind that, we've got that information to share with people.
Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting, and something that we'll probably see, hopefully, if other developers try to get in line with the Green Building Council's 2050 target. We'll see that on project teams, all over. We've spoken about materials. I'd like to know a little bit more about what makes a net zero new build commercial building. Tell me a little bit more about it, please.
So the design approach is to look at how you can deliver, in the simplest sense, a building which is built in such a way that it demands as little energy as possible to operate and requires as little energy as possible in its materials to design, deliver and construct to PC. In order to do that, you do have to approach the design process in a slightly different manner, whereas a more traditional approach might be different parts of the team moving forward in a slightly linear way, bringing forward an idea, developing it, passing it up from an architect onto your M&E, to your structures, and it evolves almost side by side in a forward manner. I think the easiest way to describe designing a net zero carbon building is like a Rubik's Cube, where you're constantly turning different ideas and tweaking them almost in real time with each other. So the size, the shape, the form, the orientation of the building, the amount of glazed to solid facade, the MEP strategy, the structural strategy, all of those pieces work together in a parametric design process, and it takes longer. I think that's completely fair to say, and as a result, the design period is slightly longer, and your fees are commensurately higher because of that. But what you are doing is working the design to make sure you can maximize the passive measures of your site, and that starts to allow you to form the key principles around your size, your shape, your form, your orientation. That is worked alongside your MEP strategy and your embodied carbon strategy from a structural perspective.
Mm-hmm. And you say it takes longer than a traditional building, but am I right in thinking that further down the line, once this process is refined, that will be shortened and it'll become more? Because I think it would worry people, to consider that it already sounds like a lot of effort, a lot of time as well. So I think that would be a concern if that was always going to be the case. But I guess, like anything, it gets refined, practice makes perfect, and you go from there. I guess there's other elements to consider as well, isn't there? And Sophie, you mentioned earlier things like the climate, building in biodiversity, net gain, climate resilience. How big a part of that is this in this project, but also in other Bruntwood projects going forward?
In sort of the wider scheme of sustainability, it has a huge impact. Net zero is only one part of becoming more sustainable, and I think we have to almost remind ourselves that, especially in the built environment, because having net zero spaces is really important, and we can't sort of take the light off that. But we also need to ensure that everything else is incorporated too. So biodiversity is a huge thing, and so is sort of understanding green and blue infrastructure and the impact that has, the different models of energy use and the impact that can have. And for us, obviously our concept building is one way that we're looking at sustainability right now, but we are already putting things in place in our buildings that are already here and exist. And one of the things that we've recently done is put a blue-green roof system on one of our redevelopments in Manchester City Centre at Block, and it was one of our pioneer projects. So the green-blue roof system is very different from a normal green roof in terms of that it wasn't just put in place for biodiversity, but it was sort of almost like a biodiversity plus. And what we're doing there is we're focusing on almost storage of rainwater to support the sewage systems during heavy rainfall. It's a partnership with Polypipe and United Utilities. And the reason why I say, we've got to think of sustainability as a wider piece is because the wider world is impacting us, and it's not just sort of carbon and then we're done. And flood risk in Manchester is obviously huge, and the risks that poses not just on the buildings that we have, but the people that need to get to those buildings as well. So we have to think about the various different aspects of what it takes to set ourselves up to a warmer, wetter world. And the roof at Block, like I say, will store rainwater in heavy rainfall events and discharge that when it's not. And it's as simple as that. There's way more behind the system than that. But in sort of layman terms, when we are on a Monday night and it's pouring down outside, our roof, will hold that rainwater until the heavy rainfall stops. So it's raining from Monday to Wednesday in Manchester. That happens a lot. But we get to Saturday and it stopped raining, and the sewage systems has recovered from that heavy rainfall. We will discharge the water then, and sort of United Utilities are thankful for that, because their sort of high risk sewage systems have a little bit less water to take in, and that's literally how the roof will work. And there's other stuff on that in terms of grass and wildflowers, which is where your biodiversity comes into it. But in terms of doing more than one thing with one system, that's what we're doing then. And it goes back to what Ash was saying earlier in terms of you've got that Rubik's Cube where you're testing things, but other things have to happen at the same time. That is the way that we need to sort of approach things. And again, at Block as well, we've got a green wall which goes down the side of the building. Again, that will attract species and will help with biodiversity, but plans do way more than that. It's right on the edge of a road, and we have to do that into consideration as well. And we're actually doing just that on Oxford Road in Manchester. We've got quite a small green wall on the edge of Hatch, and we're working with Manchester Metropolitan University on understanding what exactly that wall is doing. And what we're looking at species, yes, that's one thing, but we're looking at what those plants do in terms of pollution on that road.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all of those sort of little things where when you're looking at one thing in isolation, it's hard to understand that broader picture. And again, it's the same with the concept building. You've got that development, but what is the wider picture that that's part of? And understanding those all as one whole will enable us to make better decisions in terms of sustainability. So it's not just how can we develop a net zero building and then we're done. It's what are the little things and the tweaks that we need to make. in order to understand, well, we've got a problem in terms of being warmer, we've got a heat island effect, we've got a problem in terms of heavy rainfall, we've got flooding impacts. What are the things that need to be added to the built environment to support sort of and reduce risk from that?
Absolutely. Yeah, fascinating insight into the types of technologies that are available. Aisling, how many of those things that Sophie just mentioned are going to be incorporated on the new build net zero office development that you're working on?
The trial at Block, I think, which Sophie mentioned, it's a partnership between ourselves, Bruntwood, Polypipe, and United Utilities. It's a small-scale trial. We'll be looking at how we can roll that out, not just across our exemplar concept project, but also across our other roofs in the city as we come to work on them. We are looking at a blue roof. We do have some discharge challenges in our particular location that we're designing in, but we've also got pretty good opportunities for increase in biodiversity. Effectively, what is fairly simple green planting at the minute, we're looking to introduce something a lot more insect friendly. I think, Sophie said insects are a bit of an indicator as to the health of our general environment. Carbon's just one element, but actually, if we want to look at the health of the ecosystem, trying to put in more than just the 10% biodiversity net gain is important to us on sites like this where we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the important part of this for people like me and the wider public is that this happens at scale, because there's no point Bruntwood putting a green roof or a green blue roof on all of their buildings in Manchester. There's a lot of them, but there's it's still a small proportion of Manchester. We need other developers to be doing it and other landlords to be doing it as well. So how do we do that? How do we roll out all of these technologies and harness all of this knowledge at scale and build better cities and better places?
I think one of the bits that's important to sort of recognise, and working with in partnership with sort of United Utilities, with Polypipe, with the university as well, that information doesn't then just stay with us. And I feel like that's really important in how we sort of move things forward. And like you say, that's not just on a Bruntwood building. Actually, it goes a bit further than that. It's very hard to sell a concept to someone when it's not proven. And in order to do that, you've got to test it out, but testing it out isn't free. And that's where a partnership model comes in really effectively, in terms of we all have something to gain from it. And so it's a lot easier then to have conversations about things stacking up in different ways than we used to. And it's also very, very easy to sort of get people on board then. It takes away some of that risk. So I think in terms of scale and things like the additional elements of blue infrastructure, green infrastructure, that kind of partnership-led approach, which then has science attached to it, that's working with the unis, they can measure things for us and share their outcomes. I think that's really important in terms of showing people that, yes, it's on one building, but imagine if it was on 10 buildings next to each other. I think one of the things that we have become used to and sort of understanding and hearing a lot is sort of the benefits of green infrastructure. Now, we've seen that during the pandemic. Who didn't love going to a park for an hour a day and the impact that had on health? But actually, trees and green infrastructure in general have a huge impact on air temperature, on energy demand, and sort of heat island effect. And again, proving the concept of putting those things in place and being able to test them, model them, get the impacts of that, and share them with people are what is important to sort of getting this at scale. Now, from a development-led perspective, I can't talk about that. I'm not in development in terms of what it takes to scale sort of the building side of things, but for those sort of extra elements and the wider sustainability, it is about those sort of partnership-led, doing things together, not being isolated and sort of keeping things in-house. Obviously, it's important that you've got your USPs and things like that, but, getting the information, getting the data, working with people, improving things are what's going to help scale that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the message we're hearing, time after time after time when it comes to these conversations about sustainability and building green, is the collaboration is key and the partnerships are key. Aisling, you're involved in this project as we speak. You're in the midst of it. You're dealing with it day to day. It sounds very interesting, but equally a bit of a headache as well. How do you envisage this being replicated at scale?
So I guess maybe one of the most beneficial outputs of Bruntwood managing to get this building to site and get it delivered, which we're very excited possibly getting close to that point, is overcoming some of the big hurdles. And I think, it probably isn't a surprise to anybody listening that two of the biggest hurdles that we're working through at the moment is building control and fire strategy, as well as how we insure the building. And I think once we've created almost a pathway to show that these risks can be managed, that they can be certified, I think that helps with some of the scalability for other developers. So actually, we create a little bit of a blueprint which people can follow, say, look, it can be done. This is how we do it. This is how you work with building control with your local authority and your insurers. So it's probably an interesting fact to note that current building regs don't specifically cover non-residential mass timber buildings. So that in itself creates a bit of a headache for a developer coming forward with effectively a mass timber building. There isn't a really clearly defined set of building regulations which we can refer to as part of our risk management process with building control and compliance. So actually what we are doing is working in line with the Structural Timber Association guidelines and principles, and looking at how we can demonstrate compliance with Building Regs Part B around the fire safety elements. That has been and continues to be challenging because there isn't a blueprint. And actually, as we're working through this and as we are progressing the design of the scheme, I think playing that role post a development in advocacy and explaining and working with other developers and showing other developers and being open book about what we've done and what approach we've taken and the steps that we've taken, that's going to be really important. And I think on the insurance element, it's a non-traditional material to build a commercial office building out of. It's a fairly simple translation to assume incorrectly, by the way, that timber is a higher risk material from a combustibility perspective. And when you take a very binary approach to these things, the computer can say no. And actually, it's about how do we think differently and think outside the box to challenge ourselves, the market, to look at things differently and bring people along that journey. And it kind of goes back to what Sophie was saying about that partnership approach, working with your insurers that you've been, working with for years, demonstrating, your background, the way that you manage your properties and how that can be de-risked. And then there's obviously the technical side of it, understanding what you can do with testing of the performance of that type of material, its combustibility, types of engineered wood that you can build with, knowing that delamination in a fire is a possibility, but this is how we're going to design to de-risk that. There are lots of technical elements around timber as a material and its properties which are positive, but some which can be perceived as being negative. And I guess it's that roadmap to taking people on that journey with us. So taking building control, taking our insurers and getting everybody comfortable that the design is robust, that the specifications alongside that, such as sprinkler systems, etc., are robust. And then actually, when you look at the whole picture, it is a safe building. It is something that we should be approving, and it is something that can be replicated.
Absolutely, well said. Yeah, going back to what Sophie said, about the partnerships, as you mentioned, but also the education as well. You're creating the blueprint, as you said, for this kind of building, and that's a great thing to be doing. And as you said, once it's finished, you'll be able to tell everybody else how to do it, which I think is a fantastic position to be in. We've run out of time, but a fascinating discussion. Thank you both very much for taking the time to tell us about this project, and we'll wait with bated breath for the next news. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
If you would like to learn more about Bruntwood, please visit bruntwood.co.uk.